All right.
Fabulous.
Well,
Okay.
I have 201 on my side, so we can
Yeah.
go ahead and get started. So as I said before, thank you for joining us, everyone, today. So today's webinar is Get to Know Sea Turtles. And I'm Shirley Miller. I'm with the Homeschool Buyers Co-op, and I'd like to welcome our webinar host, Christy Frederick. She has spent 20 years as a classroom science teacher in both public and independent schools. And that she now brings her passion for science to her role as a instructional designer with Ocean First Education. So at Ocean First Education, students are taken to the intersection of fascination and education through engaging, relevant, and student-centered learning experiences. So we're really excited to have you, Chrissy. Was there anything that you wanted to share before I mention any of the things that we need to get started today?
I don't think so. I'm ready to rock and roll and learn about sea turtles, and hope you guys are as well.
Okay, cool. So as I mentioned before, this will be recorded. So if you miss parts of it, no problem. We'll have it on our website as well. And we're going to take questions at the end of the webinar. So go ahead and if you have any questions, type them in the Q&A box below. And then we'll just save the chat for, maybe Chrissy has any questions that she wants to ask the audience, and you guys can put your answers in the chat box. That'll be easier to find. As I mentioned, if some people are just coming in now, go ahead and download the PDFs either in the link that Chrissy just sent in the chat to everybody, or go back to your reminder email. The link to the PDFs are there too. And we'll need those because we'll have fun activities for our webinar today. So yeah, that'll be great. And I guess we can go ahead and get started, Chrissy, whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. I just saw somebody from Denver. Fantastic. Hello from Denver. I actually live in
Yeah.
Denver. I'm in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania right now, visiting my parents.
Oh.
And as Shirley said, my name is Chrissy Frederick. A lot of people call me Fred. So if you hear Shirley refer to me as Fred, or if you see references to the name Fred on any of the materials, that's me. You're welcome to call me Chrissy. You're welcome to call me Fred. Either one is fine. And I work with a company called Ocean First Education, and we're actually based out of Boulder, Colorado. And I live in Denver, as I said. And you would not expect that Colorado would be such a hotbed of marine science conservation. I like to make the joke that we're only, a couple thousand years too late, because, parts of Colorado used to be covered by a vast inland sea. But the Ocean First family is very passionate about bringing marine science to learners all over the world, and really excited to be here with you all today to help you learn a little bit more about sea turtles, or to reinforce things that you already know about sea turtles. Really fascinating creatures. As Shirley said, we've got some materials, some diagrams, and some materials that that would be great if you have access to as we move through this webinar. But I will also be screen sharing those materials on my computer. So if you don't have them right now, you can absolutely see them on my screen. But this may be an activity that you want to participate with your learners at home. After you know a little bit more about sea turtles, you can take them through this. And so please feel free to use those materials, not only for what we're doing in our webinar today, but for an activity with your learners that you interact with at home, or in whatever learning environment that you participate in. So I'd love to start off by providing a little bit of background information about sea turtles. So I have a couple of slides that I want to share with you. Oh, Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. I'm in Chadds Ford. This is so fun. This is people from all over the place. So a couple of slides that I want to share with you to help you learn a little bit about sea turtles. So I'm going to do that now. Hopefully, can you all see my screen? Yes. Oh, wait, hold on one second. I want to share it this way. I want to do the advanced, the partial screen share, so I can see my notes as well. All right. So let me move this bar out of the way so that I can slide share with you. The presenter view. All right. So how is that looking? Are you all, Shirley, are you able to see my Get to Know Sea Turtle slides?
I can see.
All right. Fantastic. So as I said, I work with a company called Ocean First Education, and we have lots of online marine science learning materials. So if you like what you see here, you want to learn more about sea turtles, we have an entire sea turtle ecology course on our website. We have courses about sharks. We have courses about invertebrates. We have courses about marine mammals. We have courses about Everglades ecosystems. We have a lot of partners in Florida. So please feel free to check out check out what we have, because I'm sure we have some other things that might be interesting to you as well. All right, so first thing, why study the ocean? So, you know, I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught biology, physical science, earth science, science process skills. And I found that I often used marine science examples to teach those fundamental concepts of life science, earth science, marine science, math, science, technology, engineering, art connections, literature connections. I was always using marine science as to provide examples for those other topics, because learners are fascinated by the ocean. And so it's a really engaging way and a really relevant way to get our learners excited about scientific processes. So I would encourage you that if marine science isn't something that you necessarily think of when you think of teaching science and facilitating science learning, hopefully we will inspire you to see marine science as a great entry point in terms of helping learners learn a variety of scientific concepts. So not only is the ocean incredibly powerful for those things, but the ocean is fundamental to life on our planet. So the ocean is our life support system. It's really what makes our planet capable of supporting life as we know it. So very important from a scientific literacy standpoint, I think, that learners understand the ocean, habitats in the ocean ecosystems, ocean biodiversity. So as you can see here on the slide, some of the reasons why, just a few of the reasons why the ocean is our life support system. Photosynthesis by phytoplankton in our world's ocean accounts for about 50% of our atmospheric oxygen. So if you think about that, that means 1 out of every 2 breaths that you take comes from oxygen that's produced by marine phytoplankton, very small photosynthetic organisms drifting in the ocean currents. I'm a big fan of breathing oxygen. I like it. It's a good time. It's a good thing to do. So I'm very thankful for photosynthesis by phytoplankton in the ocean, because without that, we would not have the oxygenated atmosphere that supports the majority of life as we know it on this planet. Yes, there are some living organisms that don't rely, or organisms that don't rely on oxygen. There are some organisms for which oxygen are anaerobic organisms for which oxygen is toxic to them, but a vast majority of life on our planet needs oxygen to survive. So it's really important that we say, yay, phytoplankton, and we're thankful for the things that phytoplankton do for us. Our ocean also regulates our weather and climate. You know, we are a planet that is in this right place away from our sun to provide what scientists call the Goldilocks conditions that make our planet habitable, right? It's not too warm, it's not too cold, right? And really our ocean has a lot to do with providing the weather and climate that make life as we know it capable of surviving. So for example, Venus doesn't have a liquid ocean, Mars doesn't have a liquid ocean, and Venus is too hot to support life as we know it, and Mars is too cold to support life as we know it. So really the Earth being in what astrobiologists call the Goldilocks zone, the kind of just right zone, if you're familiar with the Goldilocks and the 3 bears and the porridge story, right? The just right zone, really our ocean is what is allowing that to happen. The ocean is also a source of food. About 1/3 of the world's population relies on protein from seafood. So a huge source of food, and also supports a lot of economies around the world as well. As you can see here in this picture, this is a very famous shot. It's called Earthrise. It was taken by Apollo 8, which is the first manned mission to the moon. And it really was powerful. The astronauts really were struck by like the blueness of our planet. We like truly are the blue planet. And that's because the ocean covers over 72% of the surface area of the planet. So it's our life support system. So not only is the ocean a great way to teach all types of scientific and technology and engineering and math concepts, because it grabs learners, but also from a scientific literacy standpoint, understanding the importance of the ocean, because it's our life support system, is very, very important. Other reasons we might want to study the ocean: incredible biodiversity. So this picture that you see on the left here, this is a hydrothermal vent community. Hydrothermal vents, these places deep in the ocean where volcanic activity and gases and compounds from deep inside the earth are being released into the water, they were only discovered in the 1970s. So, you know, we've only been aware, modern science has only been aware that these existed for about the last 50 years. And when they were found, people were just shocked. Scientists were shocked by how much life was there, because up until this point, it was thought that all food webs were predicated upon energy from the sun. And this is the very deep ocean. Sunlight is not penetrating that deeply. And so scientists were just amazed by the incredible biodiversity of life that occurred around these hydrothermal vent communities. And they're doing a different type of production. They're not doing photosynthesis, they're doing chemosynthesis or chemosynthesis using compounds coming from deep inside the earth. So incredible diversity of habitats, from hydrothermal vents to coral reefs to the open ocean, which is the largest habitat on the planet. Incredible biodiversity of habitat. We also have incredible biodiversity of organisms. So this one fish you see there is the tan bristlemouth. That is, by scientific estimates, the most populous vertebrate on the planet. Hundreds of millions of these fish exist in our oceans, providing the basis of a lot of marine food webs. And then we also have really interesting organisms that bioluminesce, like this siphonophore, that is a deep sea organism. So often when scientists think about ocean organisms, they think about things like sea turtles, or when people think about ocean organisms, they think about things like sea turtles and whales, and all those things are amazing as well. Obviously, we're going to learn a whole bunch about sea turtles, that I like to include maybe some ocean organisms that don't get as much love, right? People don't think of maybe the tan bristlemouth, or they don't think of a siphonophore as being part of the incredible biodiversity of life in the ocean. Or when people think about the ocean, they think about a coral reef, which, don't get me wrong, I love diving and snorkeling on coral reefs too, and corals are incredibly important. Coral reefs are incredibly important ecosystems, but love to expand your mind to maybe a hydrothermal vent ecosystem, which perhaps is not an ecosystem that you are familiar with or you know a lot about. So tremendous biodiversity on the planet. And again, as a scientifically literate person, understanding the biodiversity of the ocean, super, super important. Our last reason why studying the ocean, studying the ocean gives so many opportunities for technological innovation and 21st century skills. So we know more about the moon. We've explored more of the moon than we have of the ocean. The depths of the ocean are something that is still, science is still just getting a glimpse at what is there, because we have just only begun to develop the technology that allows the people to explore that. So things like autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, that you can see in this picture on the left, submersibles like the one in the center, and then remotely operated vehicles like the one that you see on the right, really providing us with this astonishing technology that allows us to explore the depths of the ocean. So again, technology, a huge piece of how we live our lives in this day and age, and understanding the technological aspects that go into exploring the ocean not only are very important from a literacy standpoint, but that can really excite learners. So some learners who are really excited about learning about biodiversity, right, might not be as interested in the technological side of it. And some learners that are really interested in the technology might not be as grabbed by the biodiversity. So there really truly is something for a learner of every persuasion and every interest when studying marine science. So marine science is really where it's at, and it's really something that should be included in every learner's experience, because it teaches great science skills, but also because it's super interesting. So we are all here to learn about sea turtle species, right? So diving into that biodiversity of marine organisms, and we're going to learn about sea turtles. And then we're going to learn a specific skill that scientists, a specific tool, how to use a specific tool that scientists use to identify species. And that specific tool is something called the dichotomous key. Dichotomous keys are things that scientists and naturalists, people who are out in nature observing, they use to identify all different types of species. So you may have used, if you ever used a field guide, either to birds or to trees or even to shells, those sorts of field guides exist. You have probably used some sort of guide that's based off the concept of a dichotomous key. So we're going to learn some background about sea turtles, and then we're going to use that background in a dichotomous key activity to put our scientific skills to use and say, now that we know what we know about sea turtles, can we use this tool to identify a sea turtle species when we come across one. So how we're going to come across sea turtle species is I have drawings of sea turtles. But this is also a skill that if you are somebody who is lucky enough to live in a place where sea turtles exist, you could use these skills if you happen to come across a sea turtle in the wild as well. So that's our plan for today. All right. So what is a sea turtle? So a sea turtle is an animal, right? It's not a plant, it's not a fungus, it's not a protist, it's not one of either of the two kingdoms of bacteria, right? It's an animal. And the first thing I like to think about when I'm introducing people to sea turtles is to say, well, is it a vertebrate animal or is it an invertebrate animal? So vertebrate animals are animals that have a spinal cord encased in hard bones called vertebra, right? As opposed to invertebrates do not have that. So invertebrates that you may be familiar with are like insects, worms, arthropods, those are invertebrates. And some vertebrates that you might be familiar with are mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles. And so when we say, okay, a sea turtle is an animal, right? So that's kind of our most general category. And then we say, is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? It's a vertebrate. And then we can get more specific and we can say, okay, well, what kinds of vertebrates exist? Fish. There's bony fish, there's cartilaginous fish like sharks and rays. Rays are actually sharks. I like to think of them as flat sharks. There are even jawless fish, which are really cool, right? So when you get off this webinar, don't do it now, but when you get off this webinar, you should definitely Google jawless fish, lampreys, very cool, right? So there's fish, there's birds, there's reptiles, there's amphibians, and there's mammals. So then we say, okay, it's a vertebrate. Is it a fish, a reptile, or a mammal? Well, it's not a fish. Right? Is it a reptile or is it a mammal? It's a reptile. So all sea turtles, tortoises and other turtles, right, are reptiles. So you can see we've got a couple examples of reptiles here. So here in the top left, we've got a box turtle, which is a type of terrestrial turtle, right? So these guys are both box turtles. Here on the top right, we've got an alligator snapping turtle. Here on the bottom right, we've got a Galapagos giant tortoise. And then here in the center, we've got one of our 7 species of sea turtle, and that's actually a green sea turtle. So tortoises are adapted to terrestrial conditions, whereas turtles are aquatic, semi-aquatic, or marine, but they're all reptiles. So what unifies all reptiles? Things like being ectothermic, which means that they must rely on their environment to regulate their body temperature. They lay leathery shelled eggs. So they do have a shell, but it's a different type of shell than a bird egg, which is calcium carbonate, right? They're more of like a leathery type material. It's not actually leather, but leathery. They have bodies covered in hard scales. Those are our characteristics of our reptiles. They breathe using lungs, but sea turtles are special because they have some unique characteristics that are specific to their aquatic lifestyle. So sea turtles spend 99% of their life in the water. The only time sea turtles are ashore is when they're hatchlings, after they've hatched and they're going into the ocean. And female sea turtles come ashore to lay their eggs. So those are the only times we see sea turtles. So what are some of the characteristics of sea turtles? They can't hide in their shell. So a land tortoise or a more land-based turtle can actually bring its limbs inside of its shell. Sea turtles can't do that. The reason for that is because their shell is reduced in size, which helps them be more hydrodynamic in the water. They also have flippers, they don't have feet, right? So if I were referring to this box turtle, if I were referring to the giant Galapagos tortoise, I would talk about its limbs, right? But the sea turtle, I don't use the word limb, I would use the word flippers. And they have front flippers and they have rear flippers. And their front flippers, they use to produce lift as they move through the water. And their rear flippers, they use like rudders to steer. And most importantly, sea turtles live in the ocean. And again, as I said, they spend up to 99% of their time in the ocean. We don't see sea turtles on shore very frequently, other than when they're hatchlings and they've hatched from the nest and they're moving into the ocean, or the females when they come ashore to lay their eggs during the breeding season. So that provides you a little bit of information about what a sea turtle is. So how many sea turtle species are there? Well, right now, there were some that existed previously but have gone extinct over the course of geologic time. But right now there are 7 extant existing species of sea turtles. You might be able to name some of them, and here they are. we've got the leatherback sea turtle, the loggerhead, the green, the Kemp's Ridley, the olive ridley, the hawksbill, and the flatback. Of those 7 species, 6 of them are found in the waters off the coast of the United States. So I don't know if we have any international people here, but in the United States, we've got 6 out of those 7. The flatback sea turtle is endemic to the coast of Australia, the northeast coast of Australia, and also areas off of Papua New Guinea. So we're not going to find flatback sea turtles here in the coast, in the coastal waters or on the beaches of the United States. So 7 species of sea turtles: leatherback, loggerhead, green, Kemp's Ridley, olive ridley, hawksbill, and flatback. And 6 of those, excluding the flatback, are found in the waters off the United States. And so we're going to learn a little bit about each one of those species, and then we're going to learn how scientists can use traits of those 7 species to identify, using a dichotomous key, which species a person is observing. So how can we tell? We basically look at 2 different characteristics of sea turtles. We look at their scales and their scutes. So when we're talking about scales, we're talking about the plates that cover the sea turtle's head, right? And we're talking about scutes, we're talking about the plates that cover the carapace of the sea turtle. So the shell, the top part of the shell, is called the carapace. So prefrontal scales are located between the eyes. So you can see this is a hawksbill up here, right? And you can also kind of tell that because it has that pointy little beak right there, right? You can see that it has 1, 2 pairs of prefrontal scales located between the eyes. As opposed to here, this is a green sea turtle, 1 elongated pair of prefrontal scales. So prefrontal scales are located between the eyes on the sea turtle's head, and the number of prefrontal scales can be a useful characteristic when scientists are observing a sea turtle in the wild, or even you as a citizen scientist are observing a sea turtle in the wild. And if you were able to see that part of their anatomy, being able to note and observe the number of prefrontal scales would help one say, this is a green sea turtle versus this is a hawksbill sea turtle, right? Because hawksbill sea turtles have 2 pair, 1, 2, whereas green sea turtles just have 1. So prefrontal scale. So hopefully that makes sense to y'all. The other thing we look at are the number of scutes. So scutes are the flexible plates that make up the carapace, which is the dorsal portion of the shell. So dorsal meaning back, like if you think of like a dorsal fin, right, on a dolphin, right? The plastron is the ventral or the belly side. And there are scutes on there too, but we're going to be talking specifically about the scutes on the carapace, the top portion. So you can see in this picture, there's lots of scutes, right? So these scutes that run down the center are called the central scutes, or sometimes called the vertebral scutes, because the vertebrae, because remember this is a vertebrate, are underneath there. But the ones that we're interested in are the lateral scutes. So these are the ones that are on the side. So here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lateral scutes, whereas this carapace has 1, 2, 3, 4 lateral scutes. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more as well. So when scientists are looking at sea turtles, if they're not sure of the species, right, they can look at the number of prefrontal scales, and they can look at the number of lateral scutes on the carapace to help them make a distinction about what species they are looking at. And those are some of the characteristics that we're going to use in our dichotomous key activity to help us identify sea turtles. Okay. So this diagram here is simply, again, helping you see this in another way. So here we're looking at the dorsal view. That's that top view, because the sea turtle's like this, right? So we're looking at like a top-down view, right? These in the center are the vertebral scutes, but the ones that we're interested in are these on the side, which are the lateral scutes. And then you can also see there's scutes here, which are called the marginal scutes, right? So the ones that we're interested in are these scutes that come down the side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so this particular diagram, 4 lateral scutes. Again, this is reinforcing what we just talked about. And then this diagram here, hopefully will help you better understand what I mean by prefrontal scales. So you can see on this guy on the left, right, we've got 1 pair of prefrontal scales located between the eyes, And on this one on the right, we've got 2 pairs of prefrontal scales located between the eyes. So scutes and scales, right? Those are things that we use when we are identifying species. We use other characteristics as well, but those are the 2 that we are going to use mostly. All right. Okay, so this is a nice little hawksbill, right? You can see the hawksbill's beak right here. I don't know whether this is a male or a female. It's hard to tell until they're adults. Males have a much longer and wider tail. Females have a shorter and shorter and thinner tail. But when they're juveniles, their tails aren't fully developed, so it's hard to tell. And plus, we can't see the tail portion of this turtle. But you can see here that this is a hawksbill because of, I don't even need to look at the prefrontal scales or the number of scutes. I can tell because of this cute little, I think hawksbills are super cute. They're probably my favorite. Yeah, I know.
Very cute.
It's cute little beak, right? So again, just to reiterate, shell, right? So we'll talk a little bit about this. And here we have a leatherback. Leatherbacks are the largest of the extant species. This here is a hawksbill. I know that just because I know it would be difficult to tell because you can't really see, and it's hard. You can't see its beak. It's beak, right? It's not actually a beak. We just colloquially call it a beak. And this from this shot here, it'd be difficult to count the number of lateral scutes, but I know that's a hawksbill. So one of the first things we look at is what is the shell made out of? So this hawksbill, along with greens, along with flatbacks, along with Kemp's Ridley, olive Ridley, right? They have shells made of these hard plates called scutes, which we just talked about, lateral scutes, whereas leatherbacks, they actually don't have bony shells. They have leathery shells, right? So I'm like air quoting leathery because it's not actually leather. It looks like that. It's actually a shell made of blubber. Right? And so we often think of blubber kind of simply as being like a layer of fat, and absolutely fat is part of blubber, but blubber is actually a very complex tissue. So leatherbacks are pretty distinctive. They're big. They have these 5 longitudinal or lengthwise ridges that run down its carapace. But another distinguishing feature, or the main distinguishing feature of leatherbacks, is they don't have a bony carapace. Their carapace instead is made of blubber. So one of the first things you would look at is you would say, okay, let's look at the shell. Is the shell bony and made of scutes? If it is, we know it's one of these 6 species. If it's not, and it's this leathery substance, then we know that it's a leatherback. And leatherbacks are big. They're the largest extant species. And so without even thinking about whether or not the shell is made of bony material or not, once you see a leatherback, if any of you have ever been lucky enough to see a leatherback, you know pretty quickly that, oh, that turtle looks different. It doesn't have that bony shell. I personally have never seen a leatherback, but I would love to. It's on my bucket list of things. So traits used to identify shell, meaning what is the shell made of? Is the shell made up of bony scutes, or is it made up of this leathery material like a leatherback? Prefrontal scales, we talked about that already, right? We said, okay, number of prefrontal scales, and then scutes. So you can see here, right, on the carapace or shell, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a green sea turtle, right? And then we can also tell by color. So you can see here, this is a flatback sea turtle. This is a green sea turtle hatchling. They're slightly different colors. And we can also tell by geographic location. For example, if you encounter a sea turtle off the coast of Australia that has 1 pair of prefrontal scales and it has 4 lateral scutes, it might be a flatback because that's the only place that you're going to find those, like in that particular area off the coast of Australia or near Papua New Guinea. So we can also tell geographic location. So here we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 lateral scutes, just to give us some practice. These ones in the center are the vertebral ones, right? 4 on the other side as well. And then this green sea turtle also has 4. Right, so this is where geographic location really comes in handy because green sea turtles and flatback sea turtles have the same number of lateral scutes, 4, and they both have 1 pair of prefrontal scales. So just based on those characteristics alone, that's not going to distinguish between the 2, but geographic location may also do that. Plus flatbacks, as the name implies, have a flattened shell with upturned edges, and they're more of like a gray-green in color. So there's a lot of ways once someone knows a little bit more about sea turtles, it becomes more intuitive, right? Based on their names and things like that in order to distinguish between species. But these are the things that scientists talk about when they're distinguishing sea turtle species is what is the shell made of? How many prefrontal scales? 1 pair or 2 pairs? How many scutes? 4, 5, 6, right? Olive Ridleys can have anywhere from 6 to 9 lateral scutes, and sometimes they're asymmetric. There may be 6 on one side of the carapace, but 7 on the other side of the carapace. Color, geographic location. So there's lots of different ways that you can use your sea turtle knowledge to identify species. Here's a loggerhead. Let's do some practice, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lateral scutes, right? Well, ooh, numbering the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This is a loggerhead hatchling, right? Those of you who are from the United States Southeast, right? Georgia, Florida, right? Loggerheads are coming ashore and nesting right now, and they are hatching. You might have the opportunity to see a loggerhead nest or see loggerhead hatchlings. And if you're ever fortunate enough to see a sea turtle coming ashore to nest or to see hatchlings, the best thing to do is to give them a wide berth and don't shine lights on them. And just really know that it's a special privilege to be able to see that happening. So you really want to kind of give them the space that they need to make sure that they can do what they need to do without too much stress from humans. Because while it's very exciting for us, right, it could be stressful for the animal. We don't want to add any extra stress to their lives. Yeah, so these are the ways that we can tell different species. I've lost my cursor. Where did my cursor go? There it is. It's returned to me. All right. All right, so let's learn a little bit about each one of these species, just a little bit about its life history before we jump into our dichotomous key activity. So this is a leatherback. So you can see that leathery shell. So there's one of the longitudinal kind of ridges, I guess what they are, right? And here is a loggerhead, a leatherback hatchling eating jellyfish. Leatherbacks are jellyfish specialists. And here we're getting a glimpse inside the throat of a leatherback, which has these backward facing spines called papillae that line its mouth and its esophagus. And this enables them to eat slippery sea jellies and prevent them from escaping by floating back out of their mouth. Isn't that cool? So I just think,
oh, very cool.
I know, so cool. I just think leatherbacks have just the coolest, that's just so cool. Yeah, because if you think about it, it must be kind of tough to eat a jelly, right? It's gonna just like slide back out, I mean, things you don't think about, right? Like, oh, would it be easier or would it be difficult to eat a jelly? I mean, I think it would be kind of challenging. So leatherbacks are the largest extant species. They can be up to 1,000 pounds. They can be 6 feet long, right? So they're a very big turtle. They have no scutes, right? Instead, they have those leathery ridges, and they feed primarily on jellyfish. So those are our leatherbacks. They are the most widely distributed. You can find them anywhere from Alaska to South Africa, right? So you're not usually going to find reptiles in very cold areas because that's difficult for them to get their metabolism up to maintain life. The leatherbacks, because they're so big, they can tolerate colder temperatures and still maintain a body temperature that allows their metabolic functions to occur. So leatherbacks, you can actually find them in temperate seas, is the point that I'm making. And even all the way up into Alaska, even up into like the boundary between the temperate sea and the polar sea. So that's something that most other sea turtles are more tropically or more like subtropically distributed. But leatherbacks, because they're so big, they are able to withstand those colder temperatures. So those are leatherbacks. Green sea turtles. So these are our green sea turtles. Here you can see green sea turtle. This is a juvenile green sea turtle in a seagrass meadow. And we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of seagrasses to the life cycle of green sea turtles. So these are mid-sized turtles, right? They weigh about, they're going to be a little bit smaller. 400 pounds is probably where they're going to top out, 3 to 4 feet. They're still a fairly large size animal, but compared to a leatherback, they're mid-sized. They have that single pair of elongated prefrontal scales. Scales and scutes, right? Scales and scutes. They have 4 lateral scutes. As juveniles, they feed on invertebrates and seagrasses, and as adults, they become strictly herbivorous. So they're omnivores as juveniles, but then as they develop and they become adults, they feed exclusively on seagrass. And this is actually where their common name, a green sea turtle, comes from. So sea turtle fat is green in color because they eat so much seagrass that the chlorophyll in the seagrass actually like dyes their cells. And so turtles still in some places are consumed as food. But back in the kind of the earlier parts of the later parts of the 20th century, when sailors were exploring the world, sea turtles were often brought aboard and kept down in the hold of the ship because they can survive for a long time without a lot of food or water, because reptiles have a relatively low metabolic rate, so they don't have to eat as much as mammals do. And they were then dispatched and butchered when sailors were needing fresh meat on the ship. And so this is when sailors noticed that meat was green, and they named this species green sea turtle. So green sea turtles are protected worldwide. So hunting all 7 species of sea turtles are all listed as either threatened or endangered and are protected worldwide. But there are still places where sea turtles, very few places, but still some, where sea turtles are hunted for food. So green sea turtles get their name from that green fat because of their seagrass diet. They're found throughout temperate and tropical seas. So those are our greens. So not as widely distributed as leatherbacks, but still fairly widely distributed. So you're going to find them in the tropics. You could also find them in some temperate areas as well. Loggerheads. So loggerheads are named because they have that big blocky head, right? Loggerheads. Caretta caretta is the scientific name for loggerheads. So you can see we've got 2 loggerheads here on this slide. Again, these are mid-sized turtles, so they're going to be roughly the same size, maybe a little bit smaller than a green sea turtle. They have 2 pairs of prefrontal scales, and they have 5 lateral scutes. So again, scales and scutes, right? They have that big block head with strong jaws, so they eat mostly like invertebrates, shellfish, right? So they've got those strong jaws so they can chomp through the exoskeleton or the shell of their shellfish. So they're carnivorous. They're not plant eaters. And they're found throughout the subtropics. So Oslo, fairly well distributed. So these are our loggerheads. Caretta caretta. Hawksbill, right? So you can see the nice little pointy beak there. That's where they get their common name. Common names usually come from some sort of physical observed characteristic of a species. The thing that can be confusing about common names is that the same species can have a different common name depending on the region of the world. So they are often like regional dialect to common names, as opposed to a scientific name, which is one specific name for each species. So Ertomocales imbriacata is the Latin name for the hawksbill. And so that's a mouthful, right? So we'll just call it a hawksbill. But I do want to draw attention to the fact that that the Latin names, the scientific names, are on here. Not as easy to say as caretta caretta for a loggerhead. There's a reason why I like caretta caretta better than liking the scientific name for hawksbill. But these guys are small, right? So they're much smaller turtles. They're only going to be like 100 pounds, and they're only going to be 2 to 3 feet. So it's noticeable when one sees a hawksbill compared to another turtle, like another sea turtle. Oh, that's definitely smaller. They have 2 pairs of prefrontal scales, and they have 4 lateral scutes. So again, scales and scutes, right? Those are things that we always look at when we're examining a sea turtle's external anatomy. They have a narrow head and a hawk-like pointed beak. Again, that's where hawksbill comes from. They're omnivorous. They eat algae, they eat sponges, they eat sea anemones, right? They'll eat seagrasses. Hawksbill often are very important grazers on coral reefs because they kind of scrape the algae off of the coral. They probably get some coral inadvertently as they're scraping that algae off, but really what they're looking for nutritionally there is algae. I've had some times where I've been diving where I've seen hawksbill sea turtles that are just like hanging out, munching on sponges, and I'm just sort of diving and watching the hawksbill just munch away on the sponge. You know, I think, oh, a sponge. I never thought about eating a sponge because I'm not a hawksbill, but they seem to like it. So they're omnivorous and they are found throughout tropical and subtropical waters. So again, we have these sea turtles that are distributed in kind of like around the equator, right? Like almost in like a belt around the planet in that tropical and subtropical waters. So those are our hawksbills. Our flatback. So here is that distinctive shell of the flatback, right? So even though it has one elongated pair of prefrontal scales, and even though it has 4 lateral scutes, just like a green sea turtle, once you see that flattened shell of a flatback and that upturned edges, so you can see these upturned edges here, right? You're going to know that you've got a flatback, right? They're smaller. 1 pair of prefrontal scales, as we talked about, 4 lateral scutes, scales and scutes, right? Their body is flat. They're omnivorous. They eat lots of different things. And interestingly, proportionally, flatbacks have the largest hatchling of any of the sea turtles. So even though leatherbacks are much larger as adults than flatbacks are, their hatchlings don't have that same difference in size. So they actually have fairly large hatchlings, even though they're going to end up being fairly small turtles. And these are the ones that are only found throughout Australia and Papua New Guinea. So you can see here on the map, right? So here in northeastern Australia, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said northwestern Australia. There are a couple of nesting sites over here and up here in Papua New Guinea. So this area of the world. So you're not going to see those. We don't have flatbacks off the coast of the United States. And then we've got our 2 Ridleys. So our olive Ridley, very small. So a very small turtle, less than 100 pounds, only about 2 feet long. 2 pairs of prefrontal scales, 6 or more lateral scutes. So sometimes it depends on the individual. Adults are dark with a gray-green color. They're omnivorous. They eat lots of different things. But the thing that's really cool, I think, about olive Ridleys and even Kemp's Ridleys is they nest in these large aggregations known as arabatas. So the females, and you can see in this picture in the upper left, where there's thousands of female olive Ridleys that have come to nest here. This is actually a picture taken from a beach in Costa Rica. They time their nesting, the females time their nesting, and what exact cues the females use to know when this is going to happen, science is still working out. But they time their nesting, and huge numbers of females all come ashore at the same time and lay their eggs. And we call that collective nesting in arabata. And Kemp's Ridleys do this as well. And there's benefits and there's costs to that, right? So the benefit of it is that egg predators, right? It's kind of like a safety in numbers type thing, right? So egg predators, right? If there's so many eggs around, right? Then the egg predators come in. Well, they're not going to be able to eat all of them. Some of the eggs are going to survive, right? So that's the benefit. But the cost to it is that there have actually been documented cases of female Ridleys inadvertently digging up the nest. As she's laying her nest, she's digging up the nest of another female that had laid eggs before her or near her. So there definitely is some collateral damage between Ridleys while they're nesting because they're so packed on top of each other. So it's a really interesting reproductive strategy that both Ridleys use. They nest in these arabatas, and those are the only 2 species that do that. In general, other species kind of nest around the same time, but it's not group nesting like this. So those are olive Ridleys. And we're going to find olive Ridleys again throughout the tropical and subtropical world. And our last species is a Kemp's Ridley. So here's a Kemp's Ridley. Oh, and I will say both species of Ridleys have more circular carapaces. So their carapaces have like a shape that's more circular as opposed to carapaces of other types of sea turtles. So these guys are very small. Again, both the species of Ridleys are pretty small. 2 pairs of prefrontal scales, 5 lateral scutes. They're omnivorous. They also nest in arabatas. And something that's really interesting about Kemp's Ridleys is as adults, they're limited to the Gulf of Mexico. So we don't find adult Kemp's Ridleys anywhere other than the Gulf of Mexico, although juveniles will find them throughout the Northwest, along the coast of the United States, and throughout what we call the Northwest Atlantic Ocean. So very interesting. So if you're in the Gulf region, you may have the opportunity to see an arabata of a Kemp's Ridley, which I think would be a really cool thing to see. So those are our 7 species of sea turtle. So let's do a little bit of practice before we name in. our name in our sea turtle. So I want you to see if you can name that turtle. Okay, so this one on the left. Any ideas? Answer in your head. What do you think? That is a green. Yes, that's a green.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done. I heard somebody. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so that's a green. Scales and scoots aren't going to really help us here very much because the way the image is, we can't see it. But for me, when I see they kind of have that like roundish head, right? For me, when I see that head, I kind of like, oh, that's a green, right? Okay. This one in the center, I'll give you a hint. Look at its face. Right, you can answer, you can yell it out, or you can answer in your head. That is a hawksbill, right? So it's got that pointy bill. So scales and scoots get us so far, but we also can use other features as well. And then this one on the right, big blocky head for chewing through mollusks. That is our friend, the loggerhead, right? So those are our three kind of name that turtle. So that gives you a little bit of background about sea turtles. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a second to get out. Actually, well, let me see. Can I get out of here? End my show here. All right. And then I'm going to pull up. I'm going to pull up my next thing. So I don't know how familiar you all are with a dichotomous key, but I figured we could start off with something that maybe was more familiar to you than sea turtles, and it's candy, right? So candy. So imagine that you didn't know the name of you went to the store and you got these things that they, you know, they're kind of like gooey and they kind of look like little bears and they're like a soft chewy candy, right? We've probably have all had experience with what I'm describing to you, but you don't know what the name of it is, right? So if you had that candy, right, in a bag, you know, you went to the store, you stop by the gas station as you're filling up your gas and you're like, I need a little sweet treat. And you go in and you find this gummy candy that's shaped like a little like bear type animal, but you don't know what it's called, right? You could, if you were presented with a dichotomous key, you could figure out by using the key what candy that is. So if we look here at step one, right, we would say, okay, dichotomous, prefix di means two. So step one, there's two choices, right? So step 1A, our candy contains chocolate or our candy does not contain chocolate. So this particular candy we have does not contain chocolate. So the way this key is written, we would know that we now skip down to step 3. So we come down here to step 3. We again have two choices because that's how a dichotomous key is written. Our candy is soft, our candy is not soft. Well, we open up the container and we kind of take a bite of one and we say, oh, this candy is soft. So we're going to go to step 5. So we come down here to step 5. Is our candy fish shaped? No. Our candy is not fish shaped. Oh, that must be a type of candy called gummy bears, right? Which as I was describing it, you probably knew what I was talking about with something called a gummy bear, right? So this is an approachable example of how you could use a dichotomous key to key out something that you are familiar with. And in fact, when I would teach dichotomous keys to my middle schoolers, back when I was a classroom teacher, this is actually how we would start introducing, this is actually how I would start introducing them to the concept of a dichotomous key. Is I wouldn't start with something like sea turtles, which you know, now you have a decent amount of familiarity with, but that students might not. And I would start with something like candy and say, okay, how can we use a key to key out candy? Pretend you don't know what this is, right? And this would get them used to the tool. So, you know, we could say my personal favorite, right? Reese's peanut butter cups, right? We could do the same thing. Candy contains chocolate, go to step 2, right? Candy contains peanut butter. Oh, it's a Reese's peanut butter cup. So this is an approachable way of how to use a dichotomous key. And I would suggest if you want to do this with your learners, that you perhaps consider using a dichotomous key to something that's really approachable to them, like candy or like a video games or I don't know, types of sports, right? Have them, you know, do a dichotomous key for something they're familiar with. And then you can even have students, learners create their own dichotomous key, right? So that's a really nice way to have them demonstrate to you that they really do understand what they're looking at. Is to design their own dichotomous key. But let's talk about this for sea turtles specifically. So can you all see, Shirley, can you see my sea turtle dichotomous key and my sea turtle diagrams?
Not yet. It looks like your screen froze up a bit.
Oh,
It's still on the yeah key.
okay. So now can you see or no?
Nope, it's still frozen on my
Oh
side.
dear. Okay, well, let's stop sharing and then we'll come back and we'll see if we can. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. Okay, can we see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's imagine that we actually observed this sea turtle in the wild, right? So what could we observe about the sea turtle that could help us key out our sea turtle species using our dichotomous key? Well, we've been talking a lot about what is the carapace made out of, how many prefrontal scales, and how many lateral scutes, right? So if we look at this sea turtle, right, step one, carapace is composed of scutes or carapace is not composed of scutes. Well, we can see here clearly, right, that this turtle's carapace is composed of scutes. So we would say carapace is composed of scutes. We're going to go to step two. Okay. So step two, carapace has 4 lateral scutes or carapace has more than 4 lateral scutes. So we'd say, all right, here are the lateral scutes. Remember, these are the central or the vertebral scutes. So we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 lateral scutes. So carapace has 4 lateral scutes. We're going to go to step 3. All right. So now in step 3, it's asking about prefrontal scales. Organism has 1 pair of prefrontal scales. Organism has 2 pairs of prefrontal scales. So let's look here. We've got 1, 2. So 2 prefrontal scales, but 1 pair. So organism has 1 pair of prefrontal scales. We're going to go to step 5. Here's step 5. Carapace is flattened with upturned margins. Well, if it is, then that's a flatback. Carapace is not flattened and it does not have upturned margins, then we know it's a green. So it's kind of hard to tell from a top view, but we'll take a look at a flatback in a second. So we can say that this carapace is not flattened and it doesn't have upturned margins. So we know we just used our dichotomous key to key out that this is a green sea turtle. So that's an example of how we could use a dichotomous key. Let's maybe look at one more example. So this is the same, has the same characteristics, scutes, carapace made of scutes, 4 lateral scutes, 1 pair of prefrontal scales, right? But you can see we tried to indicate that it has upturned edges. So this one is representing our flat back, right? If you remember from the slideshow, you can really see that flat back of a flatback sea turtle. So let's look at one more. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So let's look at this one. Okay, carapace is composed of scutes. Carapace is not composed of scutes. Well, it's composed of scutes, so we're going to go to step 2. Carapace has 4 lateral scutes or it has more than 4 lateral scutes. So let's look. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's got 4 lateral scutes. So we're going to go to step 3, right? And here we look at the prefrontal scales, 1 pair, 2 pairs, right? It has 2 pairs of prefrontal scales. So we know that this is a hawksbill, right? And we're just going to do a couple of the examples here, but if you chose to do this, you could have your learner key out each one of the 7 species of sea turtles, and you all have access to this material. I want to just show you one other one. I want to see if I can find my leatherback for you. I think maybe my leatherback is all the way at the bottom. So here's our leatherback. If we have this guy, right? Carapace is composed of scutes. Carapace is not composed of scutes. We can see here from this image, we've drawn that to try to represent that the carapace is not made of scutes, but it has those 5 longitudinal ridges. And so then you would know that it's a leatherback. So that is a little bit about how you could use scales and scutes and things that we learned about characteristics of sea turtles to then build that into an actual scientific skill, right? So scientific skills that are being worked on here in this activity are observation and then using a dichotomous key. And as I said, I found that the best way to introduce the concept of a dichotomous key is to start off with something that's straightforward, right? So I decided candy because I had candy on the brain the day that I was planning this, and I was thinking, ooh, Reese's peanut butter cups, yum, yum, right? Okay, and saying, all right, you know, I can pretend that I don't know the name of that candy, and I can use this key to key it out. Or I've often done dichotomous keys to sports, right? So sport uses a ball or sport doesn't use a ball, right? Sport uses a stick or doesn't use a stick, right? Because the idea of a dichotomous key is they're two opposing statements. And then you can then use that skill to build out into identifying species. And this could be used for sea turtles, it can be used for birds, it can be used for trees, it can be used for lots of different things. And so lots of interesting ways to expand upon dichotomous keys. All right, well, that's all I have for you all. We have a couple minutes left.
All right.
If you want to get some questions.
Yeah, let's go to questions. Okay, let me pull up the Q&A. And if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and type them in your Q&A box, and then we'll go ahead and answer them live. Let's see, Chrissy. Somebody asked, what % of the planet is ocean?
So about 72% of the surface area of our planet is covered by the ocean, but the average depth of the ocean is around 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So really from a volume standpoint, we're talking about a huge amount of living area, right? And so that's why we talk about the ocean, the open ocean specifically, because that's where the depth is greatest. We talk about it as that being the largest habitat on the planet. So by far, more living space is available to organisms that live in the ocean than any other habitat on the planet. But about 72% of the surface of the planet is covered by ocean.
Very cool. Wow. So somebody also asked, are leatherback sea turtles the largest kind of sea turtle in the world?
They are, yes. So they are the largest sea turtle that currently exists. There are some species that we know from the fossil record that were larger than leatherbacks, but leatherbacks of the species that exist now are the largest extant species, absolutely.
Okay. Somebody asked, is there a common species that you can find in southern Canada?
Ooh, in southern Canada, on the Atlantic coast or on the Pacific coast? I'm wondering. Well, I'll say, I think on the Atlantic coast, there are leatherbacks that migrate up to the coast off of Nova Scotia. So there are leatherbacks that are found there. They don't nest there, that they will migrate up there and they'll feed off of these swarms of jellyfish that are being fed by the nutrient-rich waters of the upwelling that occurs off the coast of Nova Scotia. And I do think that off the coast of the western coast of the United States, we often get Pacific loggerheads that are able to live in that part of the world as well.
Cool. Let's see. Are leatherbacks the only sea turtles that don't have scutes?
They're the only species that doesn't have scutes. Yeah. So if you see a sea turtle that doesn't have a carapace made of scutes, then you know you've got a leatherback.
Let's see. Do all sea turtles have do all sea turtles have their eggs in the sand?
Yes, so all sea turtles, the females come ashore and they use their front flippers to dig out a body pit, and then they use their back flippers to excavate the rest of the sand, and then they lay their eggs, and then they cover that up, and they sort of not only do they cover it, but they try to kind of disguise it a little bit as well, and then they head back into the ocean. And often scientists that are monitoring sea turtle nests, they know where the nests are because they can see the pattern that the females leave in the sand. That's called a crawl. And species can be identified based on the shape of their crawl as well. So like the crawl of a loggerhead looks different than the crawl of a leatherback, which looks different than the crawl of a green. But yes, all sea turtles lay their eggs in the sand.
Very cool. Let's see, what predators do adult sea turtles have other than humans?
Ooh, that's a great question. So not many is the answer. So once sea turtles get to be adult size, they don't have very many predators. The exception to that is tiger sharks will predate upon sea turtles. So sharks are another passion of mine. Maybe someday I can come back and do a shark webinar for y'all. Especially because sharks get a bad rap, right? The people are like, sea turtles, yay, they're so cute. And people are like, oh, sharks are scary. Sharks are awesome. You should love sharks. They're really cool. But tiger sharks, they have these amazing teeth that are like can openers. In fact, tiger sharks are often referred to as the garbage cans of the sea because they'll pretty much eat anything, and their teeth can actually go through the shell of a sea turtle. So once sea turtles are adults, not a lot of things are going to predate them other than tiger sharks, but there's lots of things that predate upon juvenile and hatchling sea turtles. So it's less than 1% of hatchlings that less than 1% of eggs actually survive to be reproductively capable adults. So there's a lot of mortality at the younger stages from like hatchling to juvenile. But once they're adults, they're pretty much living the life.
Very cool. Let's see, what is the sea turtle's gestation period?
Oh, that's a great question. So it depends on the species. So different species, their eggs incubate for different periods of time, but anywhere from 30 to 60 days.
Okay. Let's see, are all sea turtles endangered or just some?
That's a great question. All 7 species of sea turtles are listed as either threatened or endangered. So not all of them are endangered, but at the very least, they're all listed as threatened.
Okay.
And so threatened means at risk of becoming endangered, whereas endangered means at risk of becoming extinct, just in case somebody wasn't clear on that. And there's a great organization called the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, that if you're interested in the listing status of any of these species, meaning how their populations are doing globally, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature is like the leading organization monitoring and assessing species diversity and status of populations worldwide. So it's a really great research-based, scientifically based resource to check out things like that.
Very cool. So let's see, I have a few more questions.
Sure.
Are there any sea turtles that migrate near Maryland?
That migrate near Maryland? That's a great question. So loggerheads and leatherbacks both have migrations that would take them into that temperate Atlantic. So those are ones that you could possibly see off the coast of Maryland. But, sometimes I know that there have been documented cases off the coast of New England of green sea turtles, which, like, for example, isn't something that one would expect, but it does sometimes happen. But off that kind of like temperate mid-Atlantic area, you're more likely to find leatherbacks and loggerheads.
Oh, cool. Let's see, this is a good question. Do you think there could be more species of sea turtles that are undiscovered?
It's possible. I think it's unlikely. Now, there are so many species that scientists are still discovering, but in general, the species that scientists are discovering are things that are small, right? So like microbes and like different types of invertebrates. So I think it's unlikely that there would be a species of sea turtle that we have not discovered. However, there is some debate in the scientific community about green sea turtles in the Pacific near the Galapagos Islands. There's populations of green sea turtles there that are actually quite large and are a little bit differently colored than green sea turtles in other parts of the Pacific. And scientists are having a conversation and gathering evidence for whether or not those two populations are considered different enough that they should be classified as different species. So, as we learn new things, our system of classification changes. But I think it's unlikely that there's a species, a vertebrate species as large as a sea turtle that we, meaning science, has not come across yet. But
Right.
I mean, I think it's unlikely. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but I don't want to discourage somebody from thinking that there aren't species to be discovered, because there certainly are many species left to be discovered, for sure.
Yeah. So this one's a common question. It says, what is a sea turtle's breathing situation? Does it primarily breathe underwater? Is there average length they can spend breathing on land or when laying their eggs? So that was a common question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad that whoever it is that asked that, well done. So sea turtles actually have lungs and they breathe atmospheric oxygen just like we do. So they don't have gills. So when they're underwater, they are holding their breath. So they have a really, really efficient transfer of oxygen from their blood, from their lungs to their blood, and carbon dioxide from their blood back into their lungs. So when they're on land, they can breathe easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Just like we're just breathing right now, right? They're not great. They're very cumbersome and slow moving on land, right? Because of their bulk and because they're adapted to living in water. But the breathing, they're great breathing. But sea turtles can, because of that really efficient gas transfer and the efficiency with which their muscles and their organs use oxygen, they can hold their breath for a really long time, like on the order of hours.
Wow.
Yes.
Did not know that. Very cool.
Yeah, they're like champion free divers, right? That's another thing you can check out after the webinar. Check out some sea turtles underwater, and you can even check out some of the human records for free diving are just absolutely amazing. But free diving is a whole other interest of mine. But they're just like, they can hold their breath like no problem, just doing their thing. I mean, they can sleep underwater holding their breath because they're so efficient with gas exchange.
Yeah, awesome. Let's see. How much is the warming of the ocean impacting the migration of sea turtles?
Ooh, that's a great question. So climate change, global warming is having impacts on sea turtles in a lot of ways. So one thing that we know is happening is that sea turtles have what's called temperature dependent sex determination, which means that whether they are male or female is determined by the incubation temperature of the eggs. So in general, warmer incubation temperatures lead to more female hatchlings, and cooler incubation temperatures lead to more male hatchlings. And there is kind of like a set point, right? Mm-hmm. And it's different depending on the part of the world and the species, but there is kind of a set point where the ratio of male to female is about 50-50. As global temperatures are rising, scientists have documented that more female hatchlings are being born than male hatchlings are being born. And what that portends for sea turtle life into the future, we're not exactly sure, but we know that is having an impact. Now, your question was specific in terms of migrations. Right now, that's something that scientists are keeping a close eye on, because as atmospheric temperatures change, ocean temperature changes as well, and that has an impact on currents. So sea turtles will use currents to kind of aid their migration. They're excellent swimmers, but they will also take advantage of the free ride of the migration, right? So if you've seen Finding Nemo, right, when they're like on the EAC, dude, and they're like, using the current to go along, like, sea turtles will do that, right? Because, well, duh, that's smart. Like, why expend energy swimming when you can have the current helping you along, right? So as currents change, that's going to impact sea turtles, but also as the ocean warms, and sea turtles might not need to migrate as much, because maybe they might need to migrate more, right? Depending on because most of the time sea turtles are migrating in order to find different types of food. So maybe they don't need to migrate as much because now their food is in the same spot as they're nesting, but or perhaps maybe they need to migrate longer distances because their food is now further away from where it was before. So as far as I know, we're not totally sure. There's not a lot of definitive evidence on how it's affecting sea turtle migration, but there's a lot of people thinking about it. But we definitely know there's very strong data that shows how sea turtles' reproduction is being altered by warming temperatures, because we're finding more female hatchlings than we are male hatchlings. So the future is definitely female when it comes to sea turtles.
Okay, well, we still have some more questions, but I know we're kind of running over a little time. What about if we wrap up with this person asked is, what can we do now to help sea turtles so they don't go extinct?
That is such a good question. I'm so glad that you asked that. I think the most important thing that we can do is to help other people understand what we know and what we appreciate about sea turtles. So I think education and getting people to care and be excited about sea turtles is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. If you are a person who lives on the coast, where you're in a place where you are like adjacent to or close to sea turtle nesting sites, one of the biggest things that you can do is to help make sure that coastal development occurs in a way that protects sea turtle habitat, and especially during the nesting season. So that is probably the most important thing that one can do. And another thing that even people who live far away from the ocean can do is really consider reducing their use of single-use plastic. Right? So plastic as a pollutant, right, ends up in our oceans, and it doesn't biodegrade on any like human timescale. And so marine debris is a huge problem, especially plastic marine debris is a huge problem for a lot of marine organisms, and for sea turtles as well. So reducing our use of single-use plastic, or working towards reducing our use of single-use plastic, is really something that's going to benefit the ocean ecosystem writ large. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad that somebody asked that, because there's a lot of hope there's a lot of hope, right? There's a lot of people who are really interested in sea turtles and are really trying to take steps to preserve their habitat. And that's the most important thing. Nature will find a way, right? If we as humans can find a way to help carve out some space for wildlife. Wildlife does okay when we help them have what they need.
Right. And it takes all of us to make a
And
difference.
it takes all of us.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're all on the
Sure.
same team here. Team Sea
Yeah.
Turtle.
Sea turtles. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Chrissy. I really want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today. As I mentioned before, everybody will get a follow-up email with a recorded link to this webinar. So you'll be able to access the webinar anytime on our website. Chrissy, thank you so much for taking the time
Oh, my
to
pleasure. I had a blast.
inform us all about sea turtles. Now we have much more knowledge, and we really appreciate all the information that you gave us today. It's
Well, I
been
loved
fascinating.
it. And please feel free, feel free to shoot us an email at Ocean First Education, and we're happy to answer any other questions you have. We didn't get to your question today, and help you understand more about our big blue world, because it's beautiful and it's really important. And I love spreading my love of the ocean. So let us know.
Definitely. Okay, well, I hope everyone continues to have a great day. Again, thank you so much, Chrissy, and we'll see everyone soon. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.